Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Utah Water Supply Briefing. I am Trevor from the Colorado Basin River Forecast Center. And I also wanted to acknowledge all the other forecasters who helped make forecasts throughout the state of Utah. It really is a team effort. In today's presentation, we're going to briefly talk about soil moisture conditions along with precipitation and snow for the month of March. Then we'll dive into our water supply forecasts and we'll wrap it up talking briefly about forecast error and upcoming weather. As always, this webinar is being recorded and these slides will be available on our webpage so you can review them at your convenience. Coming into this winter season, our model soil moisture conditions, we have a map on the left of the soil moisture conditions as a percent of average. A lot of the state is covered in greens and blues, which indicate above normal soil moisture. And soil moisture really is important because it points toward the runoff efficiency, whether it'll be increased or decreased. So typically above normal soil moisture conditions, you'll have increased runoff efficiency, and below normal soil moisture conditions would tend to indicate decreased runoff efficiency. Now, by the end of the spring, obviously the actual runoff is ultimately dictated by several factors, including the snowpack as well as the spring weather, in addition to the soil moisture conditions. But heading into this winter, we were looking in pretty good shape as far as soil moisture, above average across most of the state. Looking at our precipitation for this past month, really it's been a continuation of what we saw in February. Many areas did quite well with precipitation. The figure on the left, we show all areas, and on the figure on the right are what we call the major contributing areas. So these are your high elevation areas that contribute the most to spring runoff. Many areas of blues and greens, which indicate above average. The table on the right is our major contributing areas as a percent of average. As you can see, particularly the northern part of the state did quite well. Really everywhere did well, but the most occurred in the northern part of the state, and then on the far southern, the Virgin watershed, even though it recorded near average, it was the lowest as a percent of average for the month of March. Looking at the water year, so this would be from October to March. The figure on the left, once again, it shows all areas, and the figure on the right shows just the major contributing areas. Largely a good picture of above average conditions across most of the state. Once again, as we go further south, they had a little bit less precipitation as a percent of average, with the Virgin River watershed have at about 86% on the whole water year. This leads us to our snowpack conditions. On the figure on the left, we have a plot of snow-till sites, which are the square boxes, and underneath that we have our model SWE, which is in the colored areas, the color shaded areas. As we can see in the table on the right, from March to April, generally, there is an improvement across the entire state. By April 1st, our SWE was above average. I do want to point out that down in the southern part of the state, in the Sevier and Virgin River watersheds, some caution needs to be taken when looking at those percentages because many of those snow-till sites normally peak in March, and so they're on the descending leg, if you will, by April 1st. And we'll talk a little bit more of a specific example later in this presentation, but overall, most of the state, all of the state is above average on SWE. Looking at our water supply forecast in the figure on the left, we have all of our water supply forecast points color coded as a percent of average. And on the right, we have a table of select locations as well as the forecast in percent of normal. Many areas are normal to above normal. Typically areas that are doing better have better soil moisture conditions and better snowpack conditions. Looking at individual watersheds, looking at the Bear River Basin, and the next series of 5 or 6 slides are all formatted the same, so I'll explain this one. The figure on the left, we have our water supply points in the triangles, and the color shaded areas are our model SWE as a percent of normal as of April 1st. Looking at the upper right, we've singled out a specific site. In this case, it's the Bear River at the Utah-Wyoming state line. In the upper right, we show our probabilistic forecasts. And as a reminder, we do issue these on a daily basis. The blue solid line in the upper right plot is the median forecast, and then the shaded areas are the 90% exceedance to 10% exceedance. The pink bars are the official forecast that we produce at the first of each month. As you can see for April, the forecast that we just issued, we're expecting 110% of average or 120,000 acre feet for this location. On the lower right, we've included a SNOTEL plot. In this case, it's a group of SNOTEL sites that are in the area, and we can really see how the snow has accumulated throughout the season, which is indicated in the blue line, which would be 2024. On January 1st, we were sitting in the mid 60s, and that deficit has been entirely erased and flipped, and now we are above average due to a very active 3 months now in February, March, and January, February, and March, which were very active weather-wise. So as of April 1st, we're sitting at about 120% of average as far as SWE at these SNOTEL locations. Moving to the Weber River Basin, our forecast range from 110 to 150%. In the upper right, we highlight the Weber at Oakley forecast point. We're expecting 108% of average. And on the lower right, we can see, once again, a similar picture with a pretty big deficit at the beginning of January at 68%. But by April 1st, we're sitting at 122% of normal at these SNOTEL sites. Moving to the Provo River Basin, we are expecting our forecasts to range from 110 to 135% of average. Then looking at the Provo at Hailstone, we're predicting 115% of average April through July runoff volume. And on the lower right, the SNOTEL site at Trial Lake, once again, a similar story, 66% in early January, and now we're sitting at 130% of SWE, 30% of normal on our SWE by April 1st. Moving to the Six Creeks Basin, our forecast range from 120 to 165% of normal. A Little Cottonwood Creek, we're expecting 121% of average, or 41,000 acre feet April through July runoff volume. And on the lower right, the Snowbird SNOTEL site, we're sitting right at 130%. Moving to the Deschênes, our forecasts are ranging from 90 to 135% of normal. And the Lake Fork site, we're at 94% of average is what we're forecasting. This particular site is interesting because in early January, we were sitting at the lowest amount of snow on record at this particular snowtail site at Lake Fork Basin, and that has completely been made up. And now we're sitting just above average at the beginning of April. And really in this watershed, the Strawberry River drainage has the best conditions. What we are seeing here, as well as other areas, is the higher elevation snow is lagging behind the lower elevations as a percent of normal when it comes to SWE. Moving south to the Virgin and Sevier River basins, our forecast is ranging from 90 to 140%. Looking at the Sevier River at Hatch, we're forecasting a 96% of average runoff volume, or 46,000 acre feet. One thing I did want to note, which I mentioned earlier regarding the snowtail sites down in southern Utah, here we have a collection of sites on the lower right, collection of snowtail sites across the Sevier River Basin. And as we can see, the peak SWE is typically reached in mid-March, early to mid-March. And by the time April 1st rolls around, it's normally decreasing by this point, but not this year. So as of April 1st, we're at 131% of average, but if we compare that to the peak, which would have occurred on March 10, we're still above average, 116%. So it's just something to be aware of when looking at those southern Utah sites. Moving on to our forecast error, here's a plot of the forecast error in April. On the left, on the right, we've included several locations, and generally our error tends to decrease as we go forward through the spring. But even still, a large source of error is how the spring weather is going to unfold. Typically, our forecasts do better in headwaters, in areas where we know diversions and water demands. Looking forward, today and tomorrow look to be pretty active in the state of Utah. And then it looks like we're going to have a little bit of a drying trend going into next week. 7-day totals in northern Utah seem to be a little bit higher than southern Utah in general, looking at perhaps areas of up to an inch in northern Utah. and southern Utah, generally ½ inch or less. Some areas may be locally higher. Looking further out on the 8 to 14-day outlook, precipitation, generally near normal precipitation is expected. And then on the right is the forecast temperatures, and this would indicate that we have an above normal chance for above average temperatures. And so that looks to be unfolding toward the middle part of the month. So in summary, heading into this year, we're looking above average as far as soil moisture conditions were concerned. Our SWE has continued to increase thanks to a fairly active March. Most everywhere is above normal throughout the state. And this is really reflected in our water supply forecasts, as generally everywhere has trended toward an upward march of forecast volumes, with near normal to above normal runoff volumes expected. That concludes today's presentation. We'll be back again next month in May and invite you to sign up for that webinar and tune in. Here are the forecasters in our office and where they forecast. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Or if you just have a general question, you could write our operations mailbox in the red box there, or call that number, and we'll get back to you. And on the right, you can see where the presentations are located. So with that, I'll open up to any questions. Okay, I don't think there is any. All right. Well, if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out via email. Otherwise, have a good afternoon. Thanks.